Hello and welcome to Metalshubtalks with me, Samir Jaber. Today, we will focus on the foundry industry and explore how digital procurement can help foundries strengthen cost control, compliance, and supplier management. Now, foundries play a critical role in industrial supply chains. They supply essential components to sectors such as automotive, industrial machinery, heavy equipment, and many other parts of the manufacturing economy. But today, foundries are operating in a much more demanding environment. Raw materials markets are volatile, cost pressures are increasing, compliance expectations are becoming stricter and stricter. So procurement teams are being asked to deliver stronger performance while managing more complex requirements in supplier networks and documentation. At the same time, we see procurement processes in many foundry organizations still spread across your typical emails, spreadsheets, and other systems that, by today's measure, are considered disconnected. So you got supplier onboarding, certification tracking, tender management, and compliance documentation, often sitting in different places, which can make it harder to maintain visibility, prepare for audits, and make fast, well-informed sourcing decisions. Now, this raises some important questions. How can foundries build stronger and more transparent supplier networks? What role does digital procurement play in this? And how have the leading foundry organizations implemented advanced workflows to reduce costs and at the same time improve supply chain management? These are topics that I'd like to unpack with my guests here today from the MAT Foundry Group. Tim and Nick, it's a pleasure to welcome you both. Mr. Tim Abbiss, Supplier Performance and Conformance Manager at the MAT Foundry Group. Welcome to Metalshubtalks, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks.
And Mr. Nick Bolton, Purchasing Manager at MAT. Nice to have you with us, Nick.
Thanks, Samir. Cheers.
Before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to give you both the space to tell us a bit about yourselves, about what you do at MAT. So, Tim, why don't you tell our audience a bit about your work?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Samir. My name's Tim. I work for the company. I've been there 15 years now. My current role is supplier conformance and compliance. So I help the procurement teams ensure that we've got the correct quality going through the group with the correct suppliers and ensuring that the quality systems are embedded as well through the group. That's part of my job. The other part is helping standardize quality systems and frameworks through the group of companies. We've got various manufacturing bases and foundries. We've got 2 in Mexico, 1 in the UK, 1 in Czech Republic, 1 in China, with various machine shops as well, placed through the through the regions. Our product is mainly automotive product. We specialise in brake discs and drums for commercial and passenger vehicles. And yeah, I think there's a statistic that that's known that 1 in 30 vehicles on the planet have our products on it.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Tim, for that. Nick, maybe a bit about you as well, for those who don't know.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nick. I'm the purchasing manager, specifically for Eurac Poole Ltd, which is the UK site in the MAT Foundry Group. I essentially look after all procurement activities and manage all procurement activities at Eurac Poole. That includes raw materials, services, maintenance, managing budget, and departments. I previously specialised in raw materials, and I was working across 2 other sites in the group that are no longer with us. But yeah, and as Tim said, obviously we specialise in automotive. Eurac Poole Ltd is brake discs specifically, amongst other things. I've been there for 8 years now.
That's great. That's great. Well, pleasure to have you both here with us. Now, before we jump right in, to everybody watching us live today, let me quickly show you how you can interact with us here. Basically, it's quite easy and quick. So you got the chat and question section at the bottom right corner of your screen. The chat is where you can introduce yourself, tell us a bit about where you're coming from, what you're expecting from today's webinar. So let us hear from you a bit, and we'll chat with you throughout the webinar. And if you have any questions to our speakers today, we will address them in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So there's a questions section dedicated for that. So you can always put in your questions anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can during that Q&A session. All right. So let's get started. So as I mentioned, right, so foundries are having all of these different pressures happening. Nick, from your day-to-day procurement perspective, what are the main pressures foundries are dealing with when it comes to raw material sourcing today?
It's consistency is probably one of the big ones right now. Whether that's consistency of supply, consistency of quality, consistency of price. It's really volatile at the moment. Not specific, and that's not just the foundry industry. It's applied to everything, obviously, with all these external issues such as wars. There's 2 wars going on. We keep forgetting there's 2, which are really affecting global supply chains. And actually, the foundry industry itself in the UK specifically is struggling. There's foundry industries shutting. There's scrap, which I buy, which are number 1 raw material that we buy. There's scrap merchants shutting, and supply is becoming a bit more scarce, difficult to source, and that has pricing implications that make it more difficult to get the best quality product to the best price possible, to be honest. And then obviously your other sort of indirect costs have a knock-on effect on that. Energy is more expensive now. Labour costs have gone up. It's just finding that consistent supply is really difficult now, I find.
That's interesting. I mean, you mentioned multiple levels of pressures and challenges there. So, Tim, from a broader group perspective, how have these pressures that Nick has mentioned changed the way MAT Foundry Group thinks about procurement?
I think Nick summed it up really well, actually, with all the external pressures that we're facing. One thing that we try and do is standardise where we can, right through the group. So this will be our charge materials, our alloying additions, inoculations, and stuff like that. So we work with preferred suppliers based on these, and where possible, we will put them right through the group. It's not always possible because of their geographical locations, but we know what works in certain areas and we try and replicate that. And with that, we work with our current suppliers and try and onboard new suppliers domestically as well. But when we're doing that from a strategic point of view, we follow the same framework that we've put in right through the group with the supplier onboarding, the management of the quality, the expectations and the technical requirements. And we cascade this right the way through our supply chain. So all of the foundries work with what we call technical data sheets, which says our product has, the product incoming, like the scrap material, has to be a certain size, a certain grade. It needs to be on time, etc., etc. And yeah, we work with people like yourselves as well and preferred partners to ensure that we get that. So some of it's based on geographical location, but a lot of it's through collaboration of existing suppliers.
Fantastic, fantastic. I mean, that really it gives me a good segue into my next point, because as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing that across the industry, the traditional approach to procurement is still quite prevalent, right? Whether it comes to supply relationships or tendering or collecting offers, et cetera. So moving to an online platform like Metalshub can therefore be a sort of a significant operational change. So maybe back to you, Nick. So before using Metalshub, what did the raw material procurement process typically look like for you? And what was maybe the initial reason or driver for moving part of your raw material procurement onto Metalshub?
A lot of admin, to be honest. you'd have to email individual suppliers to get quotes. You could obviously send out shared documents of RFQs to your supply base, or ringing people. It would be sort of that old school, really. That was the method of retrieving any sort of supply opportunities. And the reason why we really were attracted to this platform was just the firstly, the reduction in just your basic admin, being able to have it all saved centrally, having it there available for multiple suppliers to be access at the same time, reducing the amount of time and resources getting these quotes, and also it is you kind of just get in a sort of nice process with this now. Everyone sort of is familiar with how it works. It's very easy to edit. Say if a material or our spec changed, normally that would involve having to send formal documents to every individual supplier, which can be quite time consuming. And if you miss somebody by accident or by error, then that's somebody that hasn't got the most up-to-date specification. Whereas if you're using this tender platform through Metals Hub, you update the specification. Part of the contract has now been changed that the supplier has to see before they bid, so they're aware of any changes, which just obviously from a compliance perspective is really good for us, and auditing as well. It's clear and concise. So yeah, it was very sort of labor intense trying to get quotes previously.
That's a really good good summary. I mean, we'll get to the compliance part later on, but you mentioned sort of supplier onboarding there, and I think Tim, to bring you back in, I mean, a strong supplier base is critical for a foundry like MAT. So from that perspective, what was important when introducing a digital procurement platform into your established supplier network?
It needed to be it needed to be able to evolve like straight away. And Nick's just demonstrated that really well, actually. So when we update specifications, if we have a failure or incoming issues from our suppliers, we can update that. But also from the compliance side of things, when we're out, or when I go auditing suppliers, they now know what our requirements are. They're not hidden or attached to emails and stuff. They're actually on the tender and they know about that. So it's really helped us with that side of things. It's been quite easy as well to train some of the suppliers to onboard them. So that's been quite promising as well. A small few did fall away, I'll be honest, but the majority of people we've managed to onboard successfully. And for us, having that framework that we can just upload or update it instantly is a major win, really, and it cuts down on time, and also it stops you getting onto other things and maybe forgetting to do it, because once you've done it, it's actually done in the system in Metals Hub. So that's really been quite strong for us.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's interesting that you mentioned like some of them did fall away, because I mean there's change management in the process, right? And then it's not an easy thing to help people move on to something that's different from what they're used to generally. So and I think that's an important point, because Nick, have you seen a difference in behavior with suppliers when they participate in a structured digital tender compared to your traditional, say, email-based inquiry or something like that?
Yes and no. Some I like to whenever I'll sort of pretense it with, whenever I speak to somebody who wants to supply us who's new, I essentially say that there's a couple of ways that you can utilize this platform. You can either use it solely to offer me material, never speak to me face to face, and just use that as the way that you want to offer your material. We'll have the back and forth and negotiations on price, or to payment terms, etc. And then we can do it in a real transactional way. Other suppliers when I have the conversation, I said, you can put it on there and you can ring me and we can have a conversation about what we're going to do. You can have a conversation about the product, the material. We can have a, it can be as informal as you like, but obviously I'd still like you and prefer you to be able to put your offer through through the platform. So a lot of people have changed in the way that they've done it. Some people I barely speak to now. They'll just put it on their offer, and that works for me sometimes. And then others will, they'll do it in the last second. I'll have everything agreed already in person, on phone, and then the last thing they'll do when the tender comes up is just upload the confirmation of what we've agreed. So it's really sort of a hybrid sort of tender procurement process for suppliers, and it's up to them really how they want to utilize it.
That's a great point, because I mean, one of the messages that we try to always mention at Metals Hub is that we're not here to replace people's way of work. We're here to augment it, support it. So this hybrid approach that you're mentioning is exactly that. And as long as it's working to support both your side of the sort of the transaction or the business and the supplier side, then I think it's doing its job. Now, you mentioned early on that MAT Foundry Group operates across multiple facilities, right? We mentioned Mexico, we mentioned other areas as well. And that can make sometimes procurement processes quite complex across the group. So one thing that our customers at Metals have seen, and I think you guys as well, is the centralized visibility that you can have on the platform, which can support better coordination, maybe stronger buying power, more consistent processes. So Nick, if I can stay with you, how does Metals Hub support your procurement processes across these different sites? Have you seen improvements in that regard?
Yes, I have. So it's also, some cultures are different in terms of the way they work as generally. So when I was looking after two of the German sites in the group and the UK site, and a lot of the UK scrap suppliers quite traditional, old school, and they weren't as receptive to the platform as some others were, but they took some convincing, and the way that you convinced them was slightly different to the process-driven German aspect of supply. But essentially, the visibility was the key sort of facet that they all agreed was a good idea, and that convinced them to use the platform, because it doesn't matter what sort of country you're in. If you're buying materials, there's always a very similar process. We're all audited. You'd hope we're all audited anyway, but we're all audited to similar standards, and we all want to get the best price for the best material. And it also helped with visibility for when, say, if I was doing purchasing for a German site, and say the local buyer there and the head of procurement of the whole group wanted to have a conversation about what the monthly offers were for a specific quarterly material, it just meant that information was readily available for any meeting that they wish to have. Or say if the head of procurement for the group was sort of having a look at what the Q1 offers were, it meant that they could act early rather than more reactionary. They could see that there was a tender for, I don't know, a carbon product for Q1. They could see the costs in there. They could act before any agreement was made locally and have the conversation before, which just sort of made the procurement a lot more strategic as well across groups. And it might actually highlight issues or pressure points in specific sites that could be resolved from a group buy. So Tim alluded to it earlier in our conversation, that there are certain suppliers that are able to supply multiple sites in a group buy, which offers multiple advantages that you might not get domestically. So a bulk discount, for example, or ubiquity across the group for each site. So yeah, there's a lot of advantages I found.
That's great. I mean, you kind of touch both sides, like the operational side and a bit on the strategy side. Maybe we could talk about that a bit more, Tim. From a management perspective, if we try to have a sort of a bird eye view of how this is going, why is centralized visibility in procurement important for sort of a multi-site foundry group like yourselves?
It just really helps with the strategy across the group, because we can utilize, as I said before, we can utilize what we know makes good products and processes that work well for existing applications and manufacturing operations. So if we centralize this information, it really helps benefit us commercially and technically. So the customers getting the same product from Germany as they would do from the UK and vice versa. From Czech Republic as they would do from the UK foundry and vice versa. So by sharing these best practices, and it's not just in procurement, actually, it's technically as well, and in quality systems, we try and embed it right the way through. It really does give us that edge. And we also know when something's not particularly working that well in one site, if we infill with another material and it does prove to be successful, we can look at moving towards that for other sites as well. So looking at it from a top-down perspective and seeing how the suppliers are performing and the processes are performing, it's really beneficial to us.
Interesting. So if I may follow up on that, in terms of maybe standards, does it make it easier to apply standards at the group level while still allowing each site to manage their own operational needs?
Yeah, to an extent it can, because as I say, we're pouring similar types of iron. A lot of our products are made from grey iron, and there's varying grades within that iron. So some of the raw material availability can change based domestically where it is. So the suppliers in Mexico, for example, won't be exactly the same as what we get in the UK. But we ensure that they conform to the global requirements in regards to product quality and chemistry requirements. So there's a specification, and by embedding that through, it takes time, but it pays off by ensuring good product quality and minimum disruptions in production. We utilize preferred proven suppliers where we can, but if we can't, and in this case, it'd be a domestic supply in Mexico, we bring them on board by using the existing framework and specifications. So yeah, it all kind of works together.
That's great. That's great. I mean, we kind of discussed the different levels. Now, Nick mentioned earlier the point about compliance as well, and that is something. I mean, us within the team at Metals Hub, that we've been really talking a lot about compliance and trying to understand sort of the fact that, I mean, Foundries as an industry itself, it needs to operate in a highly controlled environment because it supplies customers within the automotive industry and industrial areas as well. So you get standards such as IATF requiring supplier documentation, requiring a traceability or audit trail, and clear evidence of process discipline. So Tim, I mean, compliance is one of your key areas, right? So what are the main procurement-related compliance challenges in a foundry environment?
To be honest, it's communicating and collaborating with the suppliers, and we do that. And Nick does a really good job of it, really. When we're onboarding suppliers, we make sure they have the full technical pack. We also kind of phase them in. If we're procuring maybe a bit sensitive material, we'll start phasing them in just to make sure that we've got trial loads that are actually okay. And then once they've passed like 3 or 4 successful trial batches, then we'll allow full deliveries, etc. But the onboarding takes a lot of it, to be honest, in regards to looking at compliance. I mean, we'll look at the quality certification. We've got, I think it's a 6-page document, Nick, for onboarding people or suppliers, or a 4-page document. It takes into account their corporate social responsibilities, health and safety, quality requirements. Now, we've got to be realistic as well, because not all suppliers, scrap dealers, for example, are going to be ISO 9001 to IATF MLA certification bodies. So, and we understand that. And to be honest, IATF doesn't push that for scrap suppliers. So that's quite a good thing. But we need to ensure we have compliance through thorough onboarding and proven trials, and that's what we do really. And we also develop our suppliers. So if they're not exactly where we need them to be, we'll go and do almost like a basic audit, but also helping them, showing them the value that can be attributed to completing these open actions, because you might have contamination or potential contamination of the material, the way that it's being stored. It could be that they're not checking the trucks just before they're leaving. So it's all these kind of little things that we share with them and develop them. And by doing that, we help us both in the long run, to be honest.
Yeah.
So
that's really great. I mean, and you mentioned Nick's involvement in communication. I mean, Nick, given what Tim has just mentioned so far, anything that you'd like to add to that? Can you maybe walk us through some of your, like, how do you communicate with your suppliers to maintain that kind of not just for compliance purposes, but also for relationship purposes as well?
Yeah, I always think to sort of be a good procurement professional, you need to be a bit of a chameleon, I feel, and you need to be able to judge how your supplier is and the way that they work to get the best relationship with them. So some suppliers I'm very sort of formal with process driven. You know, this is the standard, this is the spec, this is the material, these are the expectations we require. If you're not hitting them, here's a supplier corrective action report. You know, this is what we expect, and that works some well for some suppliers. Others, it is just a conversation on the phone. It's WhatsApp. It's just chatting. It's basically, you know, did you watch football last night? Oh, by the way, the material is not up to standard. You guys need to pull your finger out and honestly improve what we're receiving. Otherwise, we're going to have to put some actions in that is going to prevent you from supplying. So I feel like it really is based on who you're dealing with and how you're dealing with it. I do have a standard sort of opening email and expectations of suppliers. So if anyone was wanting, and I don't actually discriminate from any supplier, no matter how small, how big, where they're from, or, you know, it doesn't matter to me, as long as you can hit what our expectations are and you respect what we want to do, then I'm willing to work with anybody. But we'll have, you know, we've got our TDS, our technical data sheet, which has the standards for the materials. We've got a code of conduct that we expect our suppliers to adhere to when they're dealing with Eurac Poole Ltd. And then I will do some sort of brief background checks to ensure that, you know, those suppliers are who we want to work with, and make sure that there's no sort of, you know, just I don't know, modern slavery issues, you know, those things that are your bread and butter of making sure your due diligence is done.
Right.
And then I normally try and point them towards Metalshub and say, look, this is the platform we use. This is how we do our trading here at Eurac Poole and across the group. It's not if you don't use it, it's not a no, but unfortunately you are going to be less likely to be able to supply us if you don't sign up to it, because all the tenders are going to go on here. This is where all our deals are done, essentially, or finalised, should I say. You know, there's the incentive there for them to use it, and that's essentially how I sort of deal with suppliers and the relationships.
Right. That's great. That's really interesting. And I mean, you also led us to the next point. But before I move there, to everybody in attendance, if you have any questions to Tim and Nick, so feel free to add them in the question section. We'll get to them in about 10 minutes time or so. But yeah, Nick, I mean, you mentioned about inviting them onto the platform. And I mean, so far we've talked about sourcing in general, we've talked about compliance. I'd like to talk about efficiency and administrative efficiency in particular. So we know that in procurement, you spend significant time resolving invoice queries or approving unit rates or tracking communication, etc., managing internal documentation, which is something I also struggle with in other aspects of my job. So this is very important to maintain. So you speaking about the platform so far, where do you see Metals Hub having the clearest impact on your day-to-day workload? What changed you compared to how you did things before?
Probably two things. I think the first is just the reduction in admin. Definitely, that is it. It's you know, everything on that platform is available for you to input already. So your Incoterms, the time period that you expect the deliveries, we upload our terms and conditions. You know, all of these things that usually would take a lot of time to go through on an individual buy are just reduced to mere seconds of clicking through when you want to ask a product. And then the other thing that I find really helpful is just having a centralized area with the previous contract saved, and that just helps with everything. Audits, like you alluded to earlier, unit rates. The amount of invoice queries that I have to deal with is insane, and it's really easy for me to just download the contract from 3 months ago and add it to the email and say, look, this is what we agreed, you need to amend your invoice. And they can't argue because it's just there in writing, it's in the contract that they've agreed. It's not that they would argue, but you know, just it reduces that sort of conversation and back and forth. And then an audit, and you know, we'll have multiple audits throughout the year, and if somebody asks me, you know, how does your supplier know what your requirements are, or you know, expectations, you just go straight to the platform and you show them. It just saves so much time in terms of storing your own files as well, having to go through your own personal documents, emails, searching through them, and just all those added admin tasks that take time away from you being able to do your job they've reduced so small.
That is great to hear. I just shared a link with the audience for one of our case studies that we've done with you guys that sort of summarizes also what you've been mentioning. So that's great to hear that you're getting a sort of the good impact of what a platform actually provides. So that's fantastic. Now, I'd like to maybe conclude our the conversation with a bit of a look into the future, if I may. So maybe a question to you both, but starting with you, Tim. Looking ahead, what do you think will define effective raw material procurement in foundries over the next, say, 1, 3, 5 years?
I think with all the uncertainty in the market currently, demand forecasting is going to become quite key. So being able to predict material needs based on previous years or forecasts, that's going to be quite key. I think we're also going to look at diversification for key products in case of supplier interruptions or related issues. And finally, I think smart inventory management, so you can digitally check how much product you have on site at any one time. I think that's going to really help pull the industry forward, and you'll just procure what you need when you need it. Basically, I think that's going to be the future that I can see. Also, I think with the sustainability topics, and rightfully so, starting to impact more legislation, I think there's going to be a move to close domestic sourcing where possible.
That is right. And that's a good also point on sustainability as well. But Nick, anything from you on that? So how do you see it?
Yeah, I think Tim just sort of alluded to it then at the end. I think that part of the tender process will now start to include carbon, green, scope emissions, things like that. That might be a decision that influences businesses on who they purchase from now moving forward. I think in such a globalized world that we live in now, and having all these access to different markets, I think that is something that might take a huge effect on decisions made by businesses, but might not as well, because money talks at the end of the day, I'm afraid, sometimes. You know, I'd like to think that it would, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is the bottom line for some businesses, and it's difficult to sort of see how much influence that will have. But I think that's where I think it could occur.
That's a great point. Maybe my final question before closing. Any advice that you could give other procurement people that still maybe manage their own procurement in a sort of the typical way, typical fragmented systems that we've talked about in terms of like email and spreadsheets and that kind of stuff, and maybe a bit more manually. Any advice that you would give such procurement people as to, based on your experience so far?
Yeah, persevere, keep going, trying and persevere with suppliers to use a platform. Use Metalhub, of course. We want them to use Metalhub, don't we, Samir? But I think persevere. I found it was really difficult, especially I found in Germany, where I don't speak German, and I was kind of quite new to the role. I was trying to change things sort of from an outsider's perspective, which is not always received well. But if you keep persevering, if you keep persisting, if you keep saying that this is the best practice, this is the way we want to work, the suppliers, they will onboard eventually. You've just got to keep at it.
That's a great point. Tim, any closing words from your side as well?
No, I think we've summed it up quite well. I think Nick summed it up. He uses the platform day in, day out, a lot more than I do, to be honest. But yeah, I think just keep persevering, onboarding them if you can. It does cut down on the workload for everyone as well. I think for them as well. I think it makes it much easier. But yeah, and the training that you guys have put into some of our suppliers as well, that's greatly appreciated. And it's not that difficult, to be honest. So it is quite user friendly. So yeah, if you are in the industry using fragmented systems, and sometimes you're going to have to, because the foundry industry is not just procuring ferrous or non-ferrous metals and iron and stuff. They're procuring sand, clay, coal, core coating, all these other different things that make a foundry. I think there's always going to be an element of foundries being on a fragmented system, just purely down to the industry. But yeah, for the day-to-day materials planning and buying for production, it's a good system.
That's great. I mean, this ties back to Nick's earlier point about sort of the hybrid system, right? It's that you're bringing together multiple ways of doing the job, and this is one way to make things a bit more efficient and better for all sides. Thank you both for a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it, and always a pleasure chatting with you. Now we still have some minutes to respond to some of the questions that we received. I'll allow people to ask more questions in the question section as we go into the Q&A. But before I do that, I've shared with you a couple of links. If you enjoyed today's conversation, you can always check out our upcoming episodes as well, with really interesting guests. So have a look at these after we're done with the discussion today. So maybe a question to you, Tim, and that's about the standard, the IATF standard. So when we talk about IATF 16949, what are the requirements for raw material suppliers, especially for the foundry industry?
So for the foundry industry, it's slightly different to maybe automotive manufacturers, etc. So when you're buying product that is not part of the end product or service, so for example, we're buying scrap steel or scrap brake discs, etc., to melt down, those suppliers do not need to be IATF certified. There's a section in the standard, it's called sanctioned interpretations, which actually omits steel scrap suppliers, etc., from requiring these this certification. So it's quite important for the foundry industry to know that, actually, because the amount of foundries I visit and I see that they've had an IATF audit and they've had maybe a non-conformance raised against them for not having certified suppliers. They need to understand that there's not an actual requirement for scrap suppliers. It's different if you're actually buying the product and making an automotive product from it. So, for example, you're putting a seat into a vehicle or a wheel onto a car line side. That's different. But we're buying raw materials and then creating an automotive product. So, yeah, it's quite different for the foundry industry. Alloying elements and stuff like coating and sprays and stuff like that, they would still need to be certified. But for the raw materials, such as scrap, those suppliers, ISO 9001 or moving towards that's enough.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's good. Maybe one final question, and that's, I mean, to either of you, and that's explain 2 or 3 key qualities you look in a supplier, or you look for in a supplier.
I'd say effective communicator has got to be the number one.
Collaboration.
I think, they've got to be able to speak or converse with you constantly and consistently. I feel like burying your head in the sand is probably the worst thing you can do as a supplier when it comes to issues or anything to do with supply. I just think if you're honest, you're upfront, no matter what happens, and you're willing to work with us, there's not a lot that you can do that we won't look past, really, to sort of try and get you back to where we expect. We just need that transparency and accessibility.
Also, by having that, that transparency and that relationship, we've actually onboarded new materials, new innovations into our process that we didn't know existed. So by having these close relationships with our key suppliers, it really, really does give us an advantage elsewhere.
That is awesome to hear. All right, well, I think we're getting close to our time. So thank you both, Tim and Nick, for sharing.
You're welcome.
Really fantastic insight into the industry and how MAT Foundry Group is implementing digital procurement. Now, this is definitely a conversation to continue going forward. So I really look forward to hopefully having you both again here with me. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us live or later if you're watching us on our website or on YouTube. Go check out our website at metalshub.com and go check out MAT Foundry Group website if you have any other questions to the guys. And as always, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us at Metalshub Talks. Keep an eye for our next episodes, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.
Thanks, Samir. Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers, everyone. Bye.